Before we begin our podcast, I'd like to start with an announcement. I have done over 200 episodes of a title called Agree or Disagree. That's even been what I have been known for most of my social media time, about agree or disagree. Although it has had some power during that season, it is now time for a new season. And that season of Agree or Disagree is over. The podcast will now be titled the KevOle Podcast moving forward. So welcome to the KevOle Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the KevOle Podcast. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter at KEVOLE. Add me as a friend on Facebook, Kevin Olenek. Like the KevOle Podcast on Facebook as well. And you can subscribe to all podcasts on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It's been a week of learning, a week of reflection, and a week of conversation since the tragic murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. It has revealed a lot about people, about their experiences, about their lives, and what's really going on in people's hearts. And our guests today are going to help us navigate and talk about what they have seen, what they are experiencing, and how they are feeling about what has happened. And I'm glad that you have given us the opportunity to have this conversation. I'm pleased that you are going to listen, and I hope that you listen. And if you have any questions after this podcast, we can continue on with some different things. But I'm going to start with Bree. Bree is with us, and just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you live, and we'll start there.
Hi, my name is Brigid. Everyone calls me Bree. My last name is Okwiligi. I'm Nigerian born. I'm from Nigeria. My husband and I and our two kids moved to Canada almost 3 years ago. I am a communications and PR specialist at Anchor Pacific. I live in Surrey, and basically it.
And a graduate of the same program that I am in at the BCIT, at the Radio Arts and Entertainment program as well.
Yeah.
We also have Nya here. Hello.
Hi. My name is Nya Baker, and I'm in Calgary right now, Treaty 7, and I am a diversity and inclusion strategist for a municipality in Alberta. And I also am a strategist on diversity with my own business, which I registered right before COVID. Yay. And what I do is I do trainings for corporations, individuals on inclusion. And a lot of that stuff is centered around anti-racism. And so this is really my passion, and I would say my calling. I am a registered social worker by profession as well. And I'm just ready to change the world 1 square kilometer at a time.
Nice.
Yeah.
And Hugh is with us as well. Hello, Hugh.
Hi, Kevin. Hi, guys. My name is Hugh. I'm Hugh Baker, actually. Not sure why that matters, but I am born in Canada, born in Montreal, actually, and my parents are Jamaican. I work as a student advisor for SAINT. That's actually how I met Kevin back in the day. So I've been there for about 5 years, and my interest point in all of this is really coming from somebody who has 2 children who are mixed race, trying to help them navigate everything that's going on right now, and not just for right now, but also as they grow and come to understand this world that we live in, and trying to explain to them that there may be a lot of negativity out there just because of how they look, and how do I help them through that using my own experiences through this time.
Yes, you and I worked, I think I left in 2015, so I think you were just starting when I was leaving. I think yeah. And Kenya and I knew each other back. We've known each other for, I'm going to say, about 8 years. Yes. We went to the same church.
And we're in the same book club, too.
Same book club.
For a bit,
yeah. So we go back a long ways. I want to start, though, with, I think it's we have 3 pretty different experiences. But one of the things that I think is was interesting to hear, and sort of, Hugh, before we came on, we were having this conversation about the difference between those that immigrate to Canada and how they feel they need to respond to what they're hearing and racism, as opposed to those that are born here in Canada and how they respond. I'll just start. I'll just basically start here. What is the difference? And anyone that wants to start can go.
I'll just kind of start with the part about how immigrants experience racism in Canada. It is a little shocking to find out what racism is when you're an immigrant, because you were not raised, or you didn't really experience it. When, for instance, I'm originally from Kenya, and when I moved here several years ago, I actually did get my first taste of what racism actually felt like. And it would be quite strange to say that I've watched it on TV, I've heard about it, read about it. But when you experience it for the first time as an adult, it's quite different, right? And so, Hugh, probably you have a different experience having been born here, but for me, it was just like having to step back and realize that I'm actually different. Like I'm actually Black. Can you imagine that that's a sentiment that you would have in your adulthood, right? And like I said earlier, you know what white privilege is in Africa, because it's very, very obvious how white folks get treated differently, but you don't really know exactly what racism in terms of Black racism looks like. And so I think a lot of folks are really trying to navigate some of those feelings and emotions, having to experience them at this age. So that's just one difference that I'll put out right now.
I think that being born here, one of the things that it's almost, I don't know if it's something I struggle with, but it's something that I feel is very real, that regardless of, being born here, some people don't look at me as a quote unquote real Canadian. It's, one experience that my wife brings up a lot of times is I was going out for a jog probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And as I was coming home, I passed a lady who looked at me and just said simply arrested and deported. And at the time, I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't understand why she would say that. But a few weeks later, we were walking into a Walmart, and the same lady was there, and she was yelling at an Asian man saying, "You're all going to get arrested and deported." And I didn't hear where that all came from. My wife, being the person that she is, doesn't take any guff from anybody, was turning around to the lady and yelling back at her, "You need to be quiet, keep your mouth shut. You don't know what you're talking about." And it really made me feel that there are still people who, regardless of whether you are born here, whether you immigrate here, because of the color of my skin, people will look at me as not being Canadian. And, I think to my sister-in-law who, she is mixed race as well. Her father is white and her mother is black. And her family has actually been in Canada since basically the Underground Railroad. And people still look at her as not being a real Canadian just because of the color of her skin. And to me, being Canadian is not something that should be about the color of your skin. It shouldn't be about what you look like. And, unless you're an Indigenous person, we all emigrated here. Mm-hmm. Everybody is, in quote unquote, not a real Canadian because of the fact that the only people who can lay claim to that are the Indigenous people. So if we are being looked at as, not Canadian, then they should be people who say that should be looking at themselves in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think this stems from, of course, from, the difference in our skin tones. So Kevin could come from, say, maybe Iceland.
Or even the northern part of Africa. Yeah.
And because he's white, no one looks at him and says, oh, he immigrated here. No, they just assume he was born here. His forefathers have been here since time immemorial. But if you're Black or you're Asian, they just, they look at you like, oh no, they couldn't possibly have originally come from here. They must have immigrated here. And, no one cares if you were born here or not. They just assume, oh, you immigrated here. So, it's not your land. And this is the same thing I always say. I'm like, if you're not an Indigenous person, well, don't come up in my face and tell me this is not my land. This is not your land too, So we can say that for as long as we want to. But I also think as an immigrant, coming here and seeing like what Kenya said, back home in Nigeria, we're all Blacks, even though we also have colorism issue because we have fair-skinned Africans, and they also give them special treatment in Nigeria. Anyways, I know about the bank that will not hire young ladies if they're not fair-skinned, And so when you come here, then you realize, okay, all this stuff I've been watching on the news, it's actually true, And then you realize, oh, I'm different. You didn't have all of that back home, so it's a bitter pill to chew.
And I think that stuff is really rooted in colonization, colorism, even the differentiation that we have within our own groups. All that stuff comes from colonization. If you think about it, there's only 22 countries in the world that were not colonized by the British, right? And so our experiences are all very common. So it looks different in different ways, but it has the same rooting. Absolutely has the same rooting. And even just back to the other thing about this question, so Hugh's been born and raised in Canada. Both of us are immigrants. I don't know about you, Hugh, or if you ever get the where are you from question. I really hate that question. I hate that question. I'm Canadian. Where am I from? Calgary, Alberta. What else? Where am I really, really from? 2 loving parents. Okay, that is my response now, because I find that when people ask that question, it's really trying to size you up. And like you said earlier on, it's like, you're not really from here because you don't look like you should be from here. And so I'm hoping that the listeners who are listening to this today will stop asking that question, because if I'm on this soil and I'm on this land, I'm from here. Mm-hmm. The other reason why that question is so damaging is because a lot of us have fled our countries of origin due to war and trauma. And we really don't want to be reminded, now that we are Canadian, we don't want to be reminded of where we've come from, because we have a very painful attachment to where we're really, really from. And so I get there's a natural curiosity. People don't always mean to be racist when they ask that question, but you also need to realize that there could be some very traumatic implications to asking that question.
And that's a really good point to bring up, Kenya. And my wife and I talked about that when everything was, when all the protests and everything were going on, and we've talked about that same point for years, where somebody can come up to my wife and I, and they may ask both of us, where are you from? And then we'll say we're from Canada. Whereas for my wife, that's it. They'll stop asking. But for me, it's where are you really from? And I think back to a comedic sketch that I saw by Hari Kanabulu. He's an American, and he's in this sketch he talks about how people will say, where are you from? And he'll say, well, I'm American. And they'll say, no, where are you really from? And he says, what they're really saying when they say that is, why don't you look like me? And I think that that's something that whether it's something that can be changed out of the vernacular of people, or whether it's something that we have to say that when you ask where we're from, to be able to educate people, the pain and the misguidedness of that question. I hope that one day that will not be a question that people will ask and expect more of an answer than I'm Canadian.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. I as an example, I have a friend that lives out in Surrey, and she's in a mixed race. Her boyfriend is black, and she is the one. They live in Surrey, and she is the one that drives across the border. And the reason that she does that is because she knows that there will be less of a problem if she drives across the border rather than if he drives across the border. There would be way more questions. And it's just, that's that sort of that, if I go across the border, they're not going to worry too much about what I'm going to do. Where are you going? I'm just off to Seattle. Okay, we'll talk to you later. Where that's not been the case for a number of other people, unfortunately. And that leads to that sort of, obviously, like you were saying, Bree, obviously Kevin is from Canada, so he's from here, so we can trust him.
That really just speaks to the point about unconscious bias.
Yeah.
And how we all need to check ourselves for unconscious bias, but there's a really huge thing around unconscious bias in race. So, for instance, and this is an example. So, my husband's white, and he can get away with things that I could never ever get away with. And here's a very clear example. We needed to match a battery for our remote. So he took the battery out of our remote from the living room. We went to a drugstore here that sells batteries, and he pulled it out of his pocket, and he was busy trying to compare all the different batteries with the one that he pulled out of his pocket, and he kept going back and forth with different batteries in his pocket. And I freaked out, and I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm trying to size up the battery. What's wrong? And then it occurred to me that I could never do that because I'm automatically setting myself up to get followed, questioned, arrested, possibly for shoplifting. And I looked around, and there was nobody looking over and looking at what we were doing. And I immediately just recognized that if I came into the store by myself, there's absolutely no way I would have even thought of doing that. We have a protocol as Black people when you go into a store. Keep your hands where people can see them. You don't really necessarily want to go in there with a backpack unless you can avoid it, right? There's an entire protocol of things to do. And that is really because of the unconscious bias, because it doesn't really matter how well dressed you are. There will always be something around your skin activating somebody's unconscious bias. And my example is I came from giving a powerful delivery to our city council, delivered a policy, had a great day, was on a super high, went into a store to buy myself some chocolate to reward myself, and I got followed. Right? So it wasn't anything about how I dressed or anything like that. And I immediately remembered I was Black in that situation, right? So the unconscious bias thing will always be activated. And this is why your friend will be the one to drive across the border to make it easier for other people. And that is just so disturbing that in 2020, we have to make all these calculations in our lives, right? So this issue that people are protesting right now, this is culmination of all the experiences that people have been having, and they are like, enough is enough. Something's got to change here.
Yeah. I think that's well said. And so there's been some terms that have I want to spend a good chunk of time here talking about some of the terms that have come out and sort of the meaning around them and unpacking them a bit. And one of them is more common, and there's one that I think has been, I'm going to use the word has been, there's a sensationalism to it, and then there's a subtlety to it. And the first one I want to talk about is the idea of white fragility. What does that look like? How do you see it? And what's kind of explain to us what that means to you?
Well, one example that I can bring up is when several months ago, when Don Cherry went on Hockey Night in Canada and said, "You people, you come here," and people of color were in arms about it, and when I had seen that one of my friend's sisters had posted on Facebook how, it was wrong that he should have been fired and things like that. And I posted and said, this is something that, he got fired because his terms were thought of as racist. He came out and he said, "You people, you come here," automatically stating, people from outside of Canada are the ones that are not wearing the poppy. And people jumped on that and said, he never said anything about race. He never said anything about people of color. He just said, "You people." And that's what really got to me, is that a lot of people were focusing on the "you people" is what they thought why people were getting upset. But that's not it. It's the fact that you come here. Yeah. And it goes back to that first point of, because of the color of our skin, we're seen as not real Canadians. And I think that for me, white fragility is when you call somebody on the racism point and they get upset, not because you've attacked them, but because they almost as though they live in this bubble of where, well, I'm not racist, so how can you say that I'm racist? Well, I never said that you were racist. I said that this point that this person said was racist. So when people hear that you're calling somebody racist because of something they said, and they automatically think it's because you're saying that all white people are racist. And to me, that's what white fragility is, that they are feeling attacked because you're calling somebody out.
Mm-hmm. Even the idea that racism doesn't exist in Canada is such a clear example of white fragility, right? And a lot of people think that these protests are about anti-Black sentiments in the US. No, we're also saying that Canada is a racist country. There's still so many racist practices that occur right now as we speak to Black folk, Indigenous folk. Those are the two groups that have been acknowledged as experiencing extreme amounts of racism in Canada, in addition to anything else that qualifies as a visible minority. And so white fragility are statements that I've heard over and over around, but those are my ancestors. Why should I pay for what they did during colonization, right? I didn't do it. Here's another one. I'm not racist. I have a Black friend, right? That's like so common. Fragility just basically means that you're not acknowledging the fact that when you have white privilege, there's certain things that you are accorded that people who don't have the privilege are accorded, and you are failing to recognize that. All lives matter. That's another fragility statement, right? And so we're experiencing it here in Canada in a way that, first of all, people are just not really acknowledging the fact that this is happening here. Just because Canada is a multicultural country, and just because Canada accepts a ton of immigrants every year, does not mean that racism isn't happening or is not alive and well, even in those same systems of immigration, right? So I recommend that everybody should read White Fragility by D'Angelo. It's an amazing book, and it really gets people to step outside themselves to actually look at this and not think that they are under attack. Anti-racism is not anti-whiteness. A lot of people, and that is a fragility sentiment, that when you talk about anti-racism, you are talking about anti-white. So everybody just needs to stop and realize we're talking about oppression and we're talking about power on two very different ends of that continuum. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got called out in the midst of all of this. I got called out by a couple of my friends. And while I was, going crazy about everything going on in the US, one of them made a comment and said, well, that's in the US, not here. And I said, what are you talking about? We have systemic racism in Canada here. And they said, oh, well, yeah, well, you can't compare it to what we have in the US, what they have in the US. And I said, well, even if we have 1% here, we still have it. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. And, they made comments to make me feel like I wasn't grateful for being in Canada. I wasn't grateful for Canada. And I said, so you're not going to turn this table, because if you're going to feel this way, then I don't think we should be having this conversation, because you're trying to protect your territory. You're trying to protect what you have, but you don't want to face it, and you want to own up to the fact that we have this here. And, comments like this is the reason we still have all of this going on, because you're trying to just, you're in a bubble, you're being complacent, and you're in a bubble, and you don't want to see past what we have here.
It's not the oppression Olympics, right? This is like a real issue. This is a real issue that needs to be addressed in our country.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking a little bit about, we talked a little bit about this off air as well, is the post-secondary education system. And I want to talk a little bit quickly about the immigration system after this as well, because I do think that there's some important things there. But this idea in post-secondary that you have to have 3 years of full-time English study in the language of English, I get it, but at the same time, I know when I worked at SAIT that there were people from Nigeria, where you speak English, were not allowed and admitted into the SAIT program without taking an English test, even though they spoke clear English. And that really frustrated me, because it's like, they speak English. Why do they not, they speak English better than I do. Why am I, why do I get this privilege and they don't? Why are we holding that back? And even some of the educational requirements and some, just a lot of the hoops of that I've seen of for immigrants trying to get into education, into Canadian universities and colleges. I think that that's something that in my opinion, needs to be talked about a little bit more and needs to be examined, because there's a lot of detriments there.
Yeah, for the the English speaking part, I do really think it all still boils down to thinking the system, believing that where you come from is probably nothing compared to what you have here, and wanting to make sure that they test your skills, because you're tested on your speaking, listening, reading, and writing skills, and how well I think so I think it's just based on the fact that they really want to assess, your English speaking skills. And I don't think that should be the case, because if you're coming from a country where your first language is English, all your elementary, high school, and post secondary education have always been in English language, and I don't think that should, you should be tested on that. I don't think so.
You know what? It's not even about language. It's about systemic racism. These are systems, okay? You think about Canada brings in about 300,000 immigrants every year. And those immigrants are handpicked. It's a point system. You have to have so much education, so much work experience, so much English, right? They're not really bringing the folks that are struggling to come into this country. And even then, you will still have taxi drivers who have medical degrees. You'll still have folks working fast food jobs that white Canadians will not take, okay? Working in the warehouses, folks with PhDs. It's not necessarily language is just one element of it, but the bigger system here is systemic racism. But you'll have doctors coming from the UK, and they will be doctors right away when they move here. A couple of exams here and there, they're in the system. You'll have a doctor from Ethiopia who will literally never succeed in getting into a practice and having to completely change careers. I was working with this one woman when I worked at an immigrant serving agency here, and she was the head of psychiatry in her country of origin for 15 to 20 years. And the only thing she could do when she moved here was to become a personal care worker for seniors. It's a system. Yeah.
Hugh?
I don't know if forgive me if my phone cuts out. I'm running low on power here, but I don't know if I really have anything to add to that portion of it, just because being born here, I haven't seen that side of it. I understand where your point is of it, Kevin, with the the English speaking, and it's regardless of whether the person is from Nigeria or from the Philippines, where another place where they speak where they learn in English from elementary to secondary to post-secondary. They have to go through those tests. And it is something that if we want to remove systemic racism, we have to really look at all aspects of it. And, it's I don't want to sound insensitive to what happened to George Floyd, because it's extremely sad, and it is a fact of systemic racism. But it's not. But police brutality is not the only point of systemic racism. If we solve the police brutality, that's not going to take away systemic racism. If we solve the aspect of removing these barriers of people from countries such as Nigeria or the Philippines who have all these, tons of degrees, if we remove those limitations from them, that's not going to solve systemic racism. So I think that where I'm standing is we need to look at the picture on a whole and not just be satisfied with one aspect of solving. Hooray, where everything is good. It's I watch a lot of stand-up comedy, so there's another aspect, another skit that I'm reminded of, Michael Che, where he's talking about the Black Lives Matter and how he's saying how, people are expecting people to move forward, just to get over stuff. He brought the point of, somebody a black man being shot and saying, oh, but that was 2 weeks ago, get over it. 9/11 happened, how many ever years ago? We'll never forget, and it's, if we just look at the one aspect of things, things will get better in that one aspect, but it's not going to get better on a whole.
I want to build up on what you just said, Hugh, and talk about the one thing that everybody's always afraid to bring up, and it is white supremacy. Systemic racism is just a branch off of what the real issue is, being white supremacy. We live in a white supremacist society. Everything that equates to success is modeled around white supremacy. And I think having that bigger discussion on white supremacy and dismantling the ideas of white supremacy, then we will start to actually see real change. And that just means that people really do need to come to the table with the idea that, how do we fix this? Reaching out to folks that are affected by white supremacy and genuinely wanting to make a change. When that happens, you will start to see the systems changing, right? Until that happens, systemic racism will always be a thing.
One of the things that struck me was what Donovan Bennett was on Tim and Sid a couple of times this week, sports commentator, and he talked about the romanticization of all of this. Jackie Robinson, as he used as an example of us romanticizing this, a number of other things. And I think that is sort of in this conversation as well, because white supremacy, that word, has been linked to the U.S. as part of a U.S. culture, but that has happened here in Canada. It doesn't happen because someone is wearing a cloak. It's happening in so many subtle ways. Is that are we on the same page with that? It's not, it's 100%. Not huge. It's not something that we're going to put on a billboard, but it is happening in so many quiet, subtle ways that it's being ignored.
It is as basic as a white person earning $1 more than a person of color. Mm-hmm. White supremacy, as you said, does not mean you're going to wear this white cloak and burn crosses. It means you are going to earn more by virtue of the fact that you are white and I'm not, regardless of how much more skills, education, and qualifications I have. White supremacy means that white kids will go to colleges very easily. They don't have to check that box. When you're making a college application that asks you what your race is and what you identify as, a lot of people are afraid of checking those boxes. When I applied for grad school, I wasn't so sure if I should check the box, if it was going to work in my favor or not. Not many people have to think about that if they're white. Do you know what I mean? Supremacy is in every single corner of our lives. And having those discussions once people have moved away from the fragility and literally said, we want to make this right, things are not going to change. We will protest all we want to. We will riot. We will do all those things. But at the core of all of it is destroying and dismantling the ideas of white supremacy. And I'm not trying to say that whole thing about, we're only one race, the human race, because that really diminishes our individual experiences. But it's more about how can all these races come together and not one being looked at as better than all the others. Yeah.
And I think sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, that raises another good point of where people will talk about, companies or schools that have quotas to fill for people of color or visible minorities. And I saw somebody post on Twitter today where they simply just said, hire Black people. And this was a white sports writer who did that. And somebody commented on her post and said, what about hiring the best person for the job? And her response was, for years, the best person for the job was not hired because they were a person of color. And when you have these things where you're trying to, diversify your workforce with people from different backgrounds and different races and things like that, people look at that as, and I don't know if it's just white people or other people, but people look at that as, well, they're getting a job because of some quota, as opposed to, well, we were not hired because of the color of our skin, even though we were the best person for the job. Mm-hmm. And that is something that, as much as it is there, as much as it's trying to build diversity, it's almost as though more education needs to be brought about that. You look at in the NFL, where they have a rule where if you have an opening for a coaching job or a general manager job, you have to interview one person of color before you can make a decision. And so a lot of times those jobs are, even though they may interview somebody of color, the jobs don't go to those people. But they say, okay, well, we've done our due diligence and we've interviewed one person of color. There needs to be more done in the workplace, in building that diversity, but also educating the people outside of the workplace to see that it's not about quotas. It's about giving the best person a job and building that diversity, because when you bring people from different backgrounds, whether it's different colors or different cultures, they are very valuable in that they bring perspective that is not possible without them.
Absolutely. And there's this thing called checkbox diversity, which is what you said, where you're like, oh, we're just going to interview so many people and we're going to make sure that we've interviewed a person of color, and there's our checkbox, right? We're going to do diversity training. There's another checkbox. Even in some of the most racist cooperations, you still have those types of things like checkbox diversity trainings. And so people definitely need to move away from that and actually just look at the real picture. And one thing that I've noticed in some organizations that are very advanced when it comes to job applications, they require that the applicants take out their names or anything that would identify their names or their sex. And that way you're hiring the person based on their qualifications in that sense. And you will find that is when a lot of immigrants and people people of color will actually find it easier to get to the next step, because they haven't been weeded out just because they have a last name that doesn't sound white, right? So I think a lot of innovation needs to be applied in these types of situations. Again, white supremacy is everywhere, right? It's not even about leveling the playing field. It's really about opportunity and presenting opportunities to people who need to actually get to where they need to be without having to prove themselves over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think, so if what we don't realize is when you look at a person of color, they have a totally different experience from a white person. And then they're bringing, they're kind of bringing the best of two worlds, because they've seen it both ways. And so when you say, I don't see the color, I just feel in most cases you're just ignoring the fact and you're trying to not see, because you're not understanding that I have gone through some experiences in life. You're probably trying to just, indulge me and just say, oh, no, I don't see the color. I would need you to see my color and know that, yes, I have a different skin color from you. But I also want you to just, understand the cultural differences, because that's what really makes the difference. That's where we're really different.
And they say a company that has diversity has 33% more productivity, 33% more in terms of profits, just because when you have a diversity of perspective, you're also really able to achieve higher and greater outcomes, for sure. And yeah, the I don't see color thing is so minimizing, because I want to be seen as a Black woman, because I am proud to be a Black woman. So don't tell me that you're colorblind. Please do not be colorblind. For the love of God. Yes.
Yeah. Another of these terms that have come up is, of course, Black Lives Matter, and then the flippant response, all lives matter. I'm just going to toss why, and for some people, there's some obviousness to this, but I think for some others, there's not. So, go ahead. I leave this floor to you.
Oh my God, it's 2020. We're having this conversation.
Yeah.
And the reality is in 1920, it's in 1920, we should have said, no, this is not okay.
So this particular one really gets me upset. Like, I get really mad. So it's, a woman she's in the church, she just lost her son, and she's giving an eulogy. And then you walk up to her and you tell her, oh, well, actually, do you know all kids are really important? Well, I know that, but right now I'm talking about my son, who I'm giving an eulogy. And so when people, I also think it still boils down to the whole white fragility thing, because they're trying to not acknowledge. Say, oh, but it's not all about Black lives. It's also about all lives. Yes, but right now, Black lives are in danger, and we do need everyone, not just the Black race. We need everyone to stand up to this. We need the white people to say, no, we do not support this. This is so old school. This is so 100 years ago. We do not want this. We need to work together and make sure this comes to an end. So when people say, oh, all lives matter, I think they really do not understand how deep this wound is. And they do not understand how far it can still go if we do not really nip it right now and stop it. Because if I tell you Black Lives Matter, and then you come to me and then you tell me, oh, all lives matter, I just look at you like you're unfeeling. You do not understand, and you do not want to understand. People say, oh, there are looters, they're looting and they're stealing. And you're not asking, how did they get to this point? What happened before they started looting? If I start telling my daughter, baby, live there, don't do that, and she doesn't listen, at a point, I will just flip out and say, leave that place. And then like, mommy, but well, I have been telling you to not go there. So people try to downplay all that has been happening, and then they're trying to put in the spotlight the wrongs, the things that have been going wrong all through the protest period, So the whole all lives matter thing, it's just a lot for me to handle.
Yeah.
I don't even like to think about it.
If all lives really matter, then Black lives matter, period. If all lives matter, then Black lives matter. But the fact that we keep having to say it means that Black lives, to a lot of people, do not matter, and we need them to matter. And like we said earlier, your house is important, my house is important. If your house is on fire, we're sending the fire squad to your house. And by saying that Black lives matter, we are basically saying this house is on fire and it needs attention. During Black History Month, I remember this past Black History Month, I was featured on the Calgary Police Board Diversity Board with a couple of other board members on on Black history. So they picked a few Black Canadians in Calgary and did a little profile on them. And the comments, oh, God bless the comment section, somebody was like, when do we get our White History Month, right? Or why do we need to celebrate Black History Month? These are not real Canadians, right? Again, fragility statements. But I like that somebody said, you know what? Every other month is White History Month. We picked the shortest month for Black History Month. That's all we get, right? And so I think folks just really need to understand when you're highlighting people of color, it just basically means that there's this one small space that people of color need to be heard. Let them have it. So Black Lives Matter is exactly that. We're not whitewashing it by saying all lives matter, because we do know that all lives matter. In this moment, we need to acknowledge this one particular group that is under fire from systemic racism. It's simple. It's as simple as that. We're not saying that all lives don't matter, because they do, and we know that. Yeah.
Hugh
dropped the call. I think his phone died.
Okay. Hopefully we can get him back. Don't mind me. I'll just message him as we continue. I guess, like, I really like Bree's analogy. It's like, if someone was dying, if a child died, you wouldn't go up to them and say, yeah, a number of children have died. It's, like, yeah, it's no big deal because a number of children, all children die. Like, you don't make that kind of statement. It's just, it's ridiculous to say those kind of things, and like, it just feels flippant.
Yeah.
The one I liked is there was the cartoon. I don't know if you saw it where the person's leg is hurt, someone's helping, get help, his leg is hurt. He says, and the guy's standing there. The
what about my legs?
What about my legs? Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the fact that we even have to justify that statement says enough about our lives as Black people not mattering. Period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the simplicity of that is well said. One of the things, and I guess for me as a media person, and a consumer of media, this is something that has struck me, is there was such a visceral emotional reaction to what happened to George Floyd and the incidents that happened in the U.S. And it caused a reaction here in Canada as well. But when incidents here in Canada happen, I don't seem to hear or feel the same visceral reaction. Am I off base in that? I'm thinking about, sorry, my brain is all over the place. Chantel.
Toronto.
And Regis in Toronto. There wasn't this reaction to those two incidents that there were to George Floyd. By the way, Hugh will be able to log on. He's just getting back on, so we'll continue and wait for him. But am I off base there, or is there something to what I'm noticing?
I think it really just depends on the part of the country where you're in, right? And remember, Canadians are nice people. That is a reputation that Canada has and has had for a long time, which is masked with the idea that we're not a racist society or community. So trying to it feels like a parallel of ideas. Nice Canadians, not racist. That's one thing. The other thing we also need to acknowledge is the size of Canada and the number of visible minorities, specifically Black people, in the US and Canada. That's quite different as well. Secondly, racism is alive and well in Canada, but there are some legal restrictions that we have in place in Canada that would somehow be a cushioning for some of the systemic racism to happen, especially around the police and stuff, but it is alive and well for sure. Maybe you could repeat the question because Hugh just joined us.
Yes, Hugh. There was such a visceral reaction to what happened to George Floyd, and yet when Regis Krashinsky-Paquet died in Toronto, I didn't hear as much of a visceral reaction to that. And I'm wondering if I'm noticing, if it's just me and I notice that we react more to the incidents in the U.S., in Canada, than we do to the incidents here in Canada.
That's a very, very good question. I think that there's a lot of people who believe, because there's so many people who believe that Canada is this nice and wonderful country, and how, Canadians are so polite and thoughtful, that when something like this happens in Canada, it's almost like we don't want to admit to it because we're worried it's going to tarnish our image. And when we see things happening outside of Canada, we can say, "Oh, that's because it's the States. They're horrible people there." And it's when it happens in our own borders, people almost want to, sweep it under the rug. And it goes back to how people, if I was to call out racism and, somebody would say, "Oh, don't say that," or "It's just a joke," or, "Don't be so sensitive." People don't realize the damage that does, that it diminishes and dismisses the experiences that people of color go through. And that in itself is just as dangerous of continuing systemic racism as a white police officer shooting an unarmed Black man. It doesn't get all the press, but it continues the process and it continues the ugliness of systemic racism.
Mm-hmm. And even remember when last week the Prime Minister came out and said, we have a lot of work to do as Canadians. We live in a systemically racist country, and the amount of backlash that came from there with people going like, things around Indigenous people get money from the government as reparations, or things around, look at how many immigrants we let in. None of that means anything in terms of how racist or how not racist this country is. So people don't get it. Just because you have an array of multiculturalism does not mean that we're not a racist society. So I think people need to stop equating those two things and actually just get to accept that we are living in a racist society and there is something that could be done about it. Yeah.
I feel we're just, we pride ourselves on being, so well-behaved. Like, we're well-behaved kids and we're super polite. We always give a helping hand. And when something goes wrong, we still hide behind that facade. Mm-hmm. That, we act better than people in the US. And we do not, own up to the fact that we've got issues going on here and we don't want to face it. And the fact that we let in immigrants every year still doesn't mean we do not have systemic racism here.
There's even racism in that system, yeah.
Yeah, we're just hiding under that, to show to the world that, hey, we're super welcoming and, we would accept you with And you have colleagues who would look at you and smile with you and go to lunch with you, and they do not like you. They would even back you out, but they would look at you and smile with you, and you would say, oh, that person is very polite, very, so the way I am, by upbringing, if you don't like something, you say it. I won't smile at you if I'm not happy with you. I'll just say it the way it is. I don't call blue black, but I have learned not to, I don't want to say I have learned, because I'm trying not to learn that way, because I don't like that way. But I have realized here, you hide everything behind a smile. And the same thing with systemic racism.
And the other thing to acknowledge is that the education system here does not give a true depiction of what Canada's racist history is all about, right?
Nope.
So up until the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out with its 94 recommendations, one of them being teach Canadians the true history of Indigenous people and the true history of everything that they faced, just goes to show that there's generations of people that have gone through the education system here not really knowing what Canada's true history is. If you do not know your true history as Canadians, you will not believe that this country is deeply rooted in racism and white supremacy. Right? And so that in itself is a reflection on the Facebook comments that you'll see.
There's benevolent sexism. The term that's coming to my head is benevolent racism.
Yes.
Canada is benevolently racist.
And there is nothing wrong with admitting that. And even hearing those words coming from a white person is very, very powerful, because then you're able to relate to a group of people that don't necessarily relate to our experiences to get the conversation going. Talking about racism should never be left to people of color. We are exhausted. We are tired. We need people to acknowledge that this is not just our problem. This is everybody's problem. And until folks are talking about it, there is absolutely no way we're going to come to a way of healing and reconciliation.
Yeah. Which leads to the next part here, and it's about as it was put, allyship versus accomplices. What is the difference, and what is a good ally?
I feel like I'm hogging the mic here. I'll let Hugh and Bree talk, and then I will give my piece, because I do feel very passionate about that.
Well, see, these are terms that I'm going to plead ignorance on here, but these are terms that I've heard for the first time recently. And I think it might have to do with the fact that there's so much going on with if I was to say something was racist, there's so much, oh, don't say that, or, oh, there's no racism here, or, don't be so sensitive. The term snowflake comes to mind whenever, when I was calling things out with Don Cherry, there was people who were calling me a snowflake. And I think that people need to stop insulting people when they're calling things out. So what would an ally be? Somebody who, when you call something out, they're there with you. I have a friend who I went to high school with who's on Facebook, and she's white, and she has been one of the most vocal people about the atrocities that are perpetrated against people of color. She has been one of the most vocal of, standing up for all people of color, especially the Black community with what's going on right now. And she was somebody who posted something that said the meme that she posted, it said, all these people who didn't think Don Cherry's comments were racist. What do you think now? And so to me, an ally is somebody who not just says, wave that flag, you go boy, or you go girl, and sits on the sidelines. To me, an ally is somebody who is the first one to pick up that flag and say, this is not right. We all need to stand up for it, regardless of whether we're black or white.
Yeah, and so during this time, I've had a lot of my friends, a whole lot of them who would, send me messages, say, hey, Bree, we just wanted to check up on you and your family, and we hope you guys are doing good, and we're with you. Like, they've been speaking up even way more than I have been speaking up, and it has really humbled me. And these are the people I would call allies, who would stand with you and speak on your behalf, because we've been fighting this for decades. And like Kenya said, people of color are exhausted. Black people are exhausted. Like, I haven't felt what people, in the US have, but I'm tired of being tired, I'm like, how can people be fighting for this for so long? So we do not need just us to speak about this. We need allies. We need white allies on our side to speak about this. And it has been humbling to see a lot of white people. And also in doing that, we also have to be careful. I have seen some groups where there have been complaints that, the allies, if they're not careful, they're sort of, should I use the word subduing? Or, I'll use that word. They're subduing the voices of the black people who should be, by their side fighting this cause, and they're taking it all up, and they're going forward, and they're, having rallies and protests and all of that. So those are the kind of people that I would call allies, the ones who would stand with you. And we have a whole lot of them.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts about that before I talk about the two different terms. A few thoughts about the sentiments around why are white people suddenly protesting and why are white people going to the front lines. I say they should. And I know that a lot of activists around have assigned bystander roles to white people. But this is not the time to do that, right? So the whole ally versus accomplice, an ally will stand for people and an accomplice will stand with the people, right? And I also want to be very mindful that there's so many different terms that are coming up, and people definitely need to understand these terms just because they're so changing and they're so versatile. And there isn't an expectation that somebody should be able to speak the language of social justice in every single conversation. It is okay not to know. It is okay to ask. It is okay to research. And I think the whole idea of ally versus accomplice just basically means there's space for those two roles in social justice. And there's a website I think it's called Tolerance Magazine. I don't really like the fact that it's called Tolerance, but they have a very good, there's a very good post that they put out there that said, an ally will mostly engage in activism by standing with an individual or group in a marginalized community. An accomplice will focus more on dismantling structures that oppress that individual group. And as such, work will be directed by the stakeholders, which would be the Black folks in this case, of the marginalized group. So we've made it known that we want people to stand for us. We've made it known that people need to say the message that Black lives matter. It is the work of the allies and the accomplices to work with, for instance, the police and, for instance, with other white communities in dismantling those structures. Okay? And then the ally will engage in the activism. These two words are used synonymously. These two words are used separately. There is no pressure for people to speak the perfect language of social justice. As long as you know what your role is, and as long as you're not doing for credits, You're not doing it for social media posts and likes that you went to a protest and you knelt, and yet you have no idea what the meaning of kneeling down at a protest is. So you also have to be very clear about your role. And at the same time, if you want to take space as an ally, just let the community know that you're doing this for them and you're doing this with them. You're not doing this to get gold stars from your white community as an ally or an accomplice.
I have a question in regards to this. I think there are some people that are very new to being active in this conversation that are very afraid of participating because of the word, because they are not sure how to word what they want to say, if that makes sense. And I know that there is also a part of this is there are people asking questions that are quite simply easy to find on Google. So where is the balance of trying to, for those that are maybe newer to this conversation, finding a way to fit in and participate and not and feel like that they don't have to say the words perfectly or as articulate as others are? How does that fit?
You show up. That's the first step. Just show up and educate yourself. People of color's experiences should not be tools of education. There's amazing books out there. Desmond Cole, our own Albertan, wrote a beautiful book about that. You know, look for local authors who've talked about these types of things, right? There's no lazy approach to activism and standing for people as an ally or accomplice. You have to do the work and you have to show up.
Okay.
Yeah. White Fragility by D'Angelo is a great place to start.
And what about those that at times critique, like the criticism towards some certain language? Is there, what are your thoughts around that? Is there like some can be very harsh and is in some, maybe my Canadianness is coming out here, but it's being too harsh with some people when they're trying to just participate? Is there a line there, or is it just like, I don't know if I'm making sense with my question?
So being too harsh on the part of the marginalized folks? No,
being too harsh on those that are newer to this conversation. As sort of look, you didn't say this right, so, you know, how dare you kind of thing.
I think a person's willingness to learn should not be that is more than, that's a lot for me. There shouldn't be I don't know if there's a wrong or right way. If they want to learn, it's all new to them. A lot of people are not saying anything because, you know, they're walking on eggshells. They don't know what they will say that will get people, you know, riled up. So they're going mute, you know, like they say now. So I don't think anyone should be too hard on people who are willing to learn and be part of the conversation. And they, you know, they want to stand up for us. They want to speak up for us, but they do not know how to because they don't want to offend us. So I think as much as we want them to say the right things, I think we shouldn't be too hard on them, because some of them they haven't experienced this. They have no idea. This is all new to them. A lot of people genuinely, honestly, have never experienced. Of course, they don't know what Black people have been facing. They do not have people close to them. They've never dished it out. So to them, it's all new. You know, they're in a world of their own, and then they realize, oh, this is real, and I don't want this. I don't like this. How do I be part of this? How do I help out? And I think we should be willing to give people like that a chance, you know, to come on board, and to, you know, show their support.
Yes and no. I agree. For one, again, like I said earlier on, showing up is the first step. It's really impossible to learn how to speak the language of social justice, especially when it's ever changing. But if you are challenging yourself to speak that language and understand what people's true stories really are, like I said, there's no room for laziness here. Do what you got to do the work. And it's not up to me to show you how to do the work, for one. And I get it where people don't really understand our experiences, but that is the difference between sympathy and empathy. I don't want sympathy. I want somebody to stand in my shoes and acknowledge how painful it is to walk in these shoes, and do what you can using your privilege to walk in my shoes. The fact that you are a couple of shades lighter than me already means that you have a voice, and you're able to use that voice, whether or not you speak the language. If your intentions are true and pure and you want to dismantle the system, you will find a way of doing it. And then to the folks that feel that they will be quiet because they don't want to say the wrong things, you're basically sitting in the shoes of a racist person, because saying nothing is saying everything. You cannot be silent just because you don't have the words to say. You have the privilege to stand up for me as a Black person, and you can use that privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think also being humble in understanding that you're not going to know everything. Mm-hmm. You're not going to understand everything. And my wife has posted a few amazing things recently, admitting to her own, being naive to certain things. She would be the first to say that, before everything started happening, when somebody said white privilege, she was the first to say that she had, she got her back up. It was like, what do you mean white privilege? But she has also realize that she is learning as she goes, and the humility that she's showing makes me so honored to be able to call her my wife, and to be able to see the growth that she's going through while still learning and understanding that, when somebody says white privilege, it's not about me. It's a reality that, now that I'm seeing this and I'm understanding. And I think that there needs to be that humility from people who are coming and realizing that, I don't know everything, and, I'm going to do the work to try and to learn more. And as I learn more, I'm going to understand that because I don't know it all, I shouldn't get offended if somebody says, that's wrong, or, go back and think about this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's really all about having a dialogue. And once we peel off all our defenses and we put the fragility aside, and even the sentiments that we're feeling as people of color, and just have a really raw conversation and just be open to that. You don't need the language to just kind of understand humanity, right? That's just the most basic thing, understanding humanity. That the fact that my nephews have to have the conversation with their parents about how to behave around a police officer if a police officer pulls you over, how to conduct yourself in public, how to conduct yourself when you go to a store. And my husband, who's white, had never had to have those conversations. And if we have a kid, we're going to have to start thinking about having those conversations. There's a big shift in people's experiences. And once you start to understand, like Hugh said, where someone else is coming from, even though you don't share the experience, then you're definitely bound to have healthier conversations without having to get into different complexities of language. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. There's a lot to absorb there, and get some good things there to chew on. I want to get to maybe our last or second last. I don't know, but it's a question that Hugh brought up. It's in terms of an agenda question, and it's around what happens if. So will the majority of people who are standing with people of color still be there after the police who killed George Floyd are found guilty? And what happens if they are acquitted? Now, I have heard both sides of, like, in terms, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to pretend to be a lawyer. But I have heard one perspective that says what is the charges as is currently now is a good thing. And the charges from one lawyer perspective is actually, it's a bad thing, and they should have remained at second degree. So I guess what do you, the result, whatever the result is, and I think we can all agree, we hope that these perpetrators are found guilty. What happens? What do you want to happen? What do you hope happens? Because one of the things I guess that's in my head that I'm a little concerned about is if they are found guilty, the words "it's over" are going to come. If Donald Trump loses the presidential election in November, I think that there's going to be a mindset in some of us that will say it's over. And I'm not sure that that's true.
And I think that speaks to something I had said earlier, where it's not just about the police brutality. It's not just about the person who's currently in office right now. It's about continuing the work. It's about continuing to move forward so that we can break that down one thing at a time, even if we have to. It's not going to happen overnight. And I do worry that if they're found guilty, that, just as you said, Kevin, that it's going to be the thought of, okay, it's over. And everybody's just going to go back to, okay, that's done. Now let's just continue on with our blissful lives where we don't see color and we don't see racism. I hope that this is the catalyst to change that will change everything. Well, start the change in the law enforcement, and then that will start the change in the educational institutions, and then that will start the change in the judicial system, and then that will start the change in the political system. There's too much divisiveness. If somebody says, I am standing against racism, I'm anti-racist, I've seen a lot of people say, oh, well, that's because you're a liberal. Racism does not see political boundaries. It does not see, economical, standing. As much as people may think, somebody who's rich, if they're Black, they're going to be in a better position. You ask any white person, regardless of how rich a Black person is, you ask any white person if they want to switch places with that person, they're not going to do it, because that is where the white privilege comes into play. Mm-hmm. We need to see that there is going to be continual progress, that the police who are found guilty, if they are just the start of all the systemic racism being broken down, and we need to keep going forward.
Kevin, that question would best be answered by somebody who's not of color, because that is where the power lies.
Okay.
That is where the power lies. This did not just start and end with Floyd, Martin Luther King, and all those people that came after him. This is a continued story. This is a continued fight. The difference is we need more allies and accomplices to actually break this. Yeah.
Yeah. This is way above. This is not about Trump or just about George Floyd. I think this is the first time in a very long time that the whole world is realizing that, wow, this thing is it's still really here. Like it's not just what we see on the surface. This has gone really, really deep. And I am praying that after the cops or the ex-cops have been convicted, we don't just sit back, and especially our allies don't just sit back and say, oh, okay, so they've got them, so that should be good. There's a whole lot of reforms to be done. Like, it's in the little things, from how a young Black woman should keep her hair, or how she has to feel that she has to straighten her hair to look good, and her curls are terrible and too hard and too difficult to manage. You know, and it's in the little things that we do not realize is there. And we really, really have to sit down and really dig deep into all of these things and break all these different, you know, shatter it all to pieces. Yeah.
Okay. That's fair. Is there anything else that we have not touched on yet that you would like to discuss?
Just like to share something that I shared on Facebook, a poem that I copied from someone, and it really does speak to the current situation. Whereas people are really just trying to look for answers from Black people just want a break and want people to try and find those answers as they're taking a break. So the poem says, your Black friend is trying to be okay. Your Black friend in the past couple of days has watched a Black man get shot dead while jogging, a Black woman shot dead while sleeping, the murder of a Black man by Minneapolis police officers. Your Black friend has also listened to the President of the United States use language as a veiled threat. Your Black friend is trying to be okay. Please do not ask us about the looting. Please do not chastise us about rioting. Please don't tell us that all lives matter. Please do not minimize our fear, and please do not bring up Black on Black crime. Please don't say, if you just act like Oprah, Obama, Colin Powell, Denzel, insert any Black successful person. Please do not judge us. Your Black friend is trying to be okay. Listen to your Black friend, empathize with your Black friend, support your Black friend, pray for your Black friend, and pray with your Black friend. Just let your Black friend know that you really care. Your Black friend will remember who truly had their back during this difficult time. They will remember who was more concerned about a looted Target. They will also remember you posting a thinly veiled and racially offensive meme. They will remember you calling us looters and savages. And they will remember your silence about their Black life and that of other Black lives. This is really easy. Do whatever you can to help your Black friend out, because your Black friend is trying to be okay. So, yeah. You know, I was hoping that we would talk about this whole idea of how everybody is for the protests, but they're against the looting.
We can talk about that.
Because it really just shows that if someone's actually focusing on things in a store and property, it already shows you where a person's life is, a Black person's life is in relation to property and other things that are insured, by the way, but a life that will never be brought back. And I am so sick and tired of hearing people talking about riots and how unruly it is, and, you know, and still not even referring to the cause and the root cause of why this is happening. All revolutions have had this sort of issue. This is not just Black people who've learned how, and even then, the people who are looting, as you have seen, are not necessarily the people that are grieving. And so I would like people to just really shift the conversation and talk about the root cause and not about the things that are being damaged, because those are material things that could be replaced. Yeah.
And it's that reminds me of something I saw on Facebook where it was talking about semantics and switching your language around. And the example was, instead of saying, well, it's horrible that the police murdered that young man, murdered that man, but they shouldn't be tearing down the buildings or whatever. Try saying, it's terrible that these buildings are being burned, but they shouldn't have killed that man.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really understanding that peaceful protests we've been doing that. Colin Kaepernick took a knee, and they were like, "Oh, you're disrespecting America." Black athletes will speak up, use their platform to speak against racial, systemic racism, and they'll say, "Oh, stick to playing sports."
Mm-hmm.
When somebody is trying to tell you that there's injustice in the world, there's only so much that we can sit back and say until we explode. It's it goes back to something I heard that, if you can only kick a dog so many times before it bites your leg off. And you can only push a person down until they rise up and say enough. For far too long, we've been silent. We've been the peaceful protesters. The peaceful protesters in the 60s when Black people were fighting for civil rights, and they turned water hoses on us. Martin Luther King came out to protest civil rights, and he was assassinated. When peaceful protests, when people are taking a knee to protest police brutality, when people are speaking out to speak against systemic racism, and it gets pushed away, we get told, stop, don't protest that way, don't do it that way, don't do it that way. What else could you expect?
Yes.
It's
go ahead.
I don't think there's been any real revolution I can remember or read about that came by peaceful protest. Whether it was when they had to abolish the slave trade, or when Blacks had to start voting. Like, when you push up people and you keep pushing them and they keep telling you, when they have their backs against the wall, they will fight back, and you're not going to like it. And people have come out on several occasions to say, look, we've got to stop this. And I do not like the looting, but I understand what it's all about. And so I will not be quick to come out and say, oh, they shouldn't be protesting. Well, they shouldn't be doing what they're doing to Black people. Because that's what you get.
It's like a PR campaign in some ways. It's like, well, if you change your image, then we would, this isn't about PR. This is real life. Like, this is
what happens when you're invisible.
Yeah.
You have to find a way to make yourself visible.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you say the PR, if you change your image, because I had seen a quote from Colin Powell talking about Colin Kaepernick taking a knee and the athletes taking a knee. And he said, well, if they had just come out and said, I love America, then then taking the knee wouldn't be a problem. And then later on in that same tweet, there was an actual quote from Colin Kaepernick who said, I'm not taking a knee against America. I love America. But yet, so he said that, but yet they're still attacking him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot to unpack, and we've been able to do this in a very critical thought process, and we've not put our emotions in this or even our personal stories, because these are the facts and this is what's out there, and people need to listen. People need to understand that everybody has a role in this fight. Everybody has a role in this war. And even this being Indigenous Awareness Month right now, you're seeing the Indigenous people are standing with Black Lives Matter because they understand the struggles too. But we don't just want our fellow strugglers to stand with us, right? We want everyone to stand with us. And I don't think, and this is something I said earlier before we started the show, is there shouldn't be that big, heavy burden just because you're a person of color to have to take it to the streets to protest. There's a lot of factors that are preventing people from doing that. There's re-traumatization for people who are refugees. There's issues around people who are worried about their documentation and what that would look like, right? There's a lot of fear, and fear that has a past, because right now what we're going through, this is trauma. We are being traumatized by the images we see on TV and being re-traumatized when we're out on the streets as well. So I really just want people to know that if you have the privilege of standing with someone as an accomplice and standing for someone as an ally, go ahead and do it, because right now a lot of marginalized folks are really, really struggling and they're not able to show up, but they should not feel guilty about that.
So, for how are all three of you doing? And I'm not asking that as hey, how's it going? It's a good reminder about the mental health aspect and what you brought up here, Kenya, about the mental health aspect. How are you doing?
So the first week was a mess for me, and it affected my work, because I had a meeting with my director last week, and she said, Bree, I noticed for the past 1 week you've not been in the game. And I cried a lot that first week. I was upset. And when they said racial tension flying all around, I really accepted that, because I felt that way. I was upset. I was sad. I was very, very angry. And I think I was so close to tipping over. I feel a lot better now, and I'm in a better place now. But it's been the past 1 week has been a struggle for me. It has.
I think it's hard for me to really say how I'm doing. I'm not the type of person that usually shares my emotions, and many times that has caused some struggles with me. I believe it seems like when I feel like, okay, I can see myself getting better and feeling like, okay, yeah, I'm doing okay, I see another response to somebody, to a tweet that from somebody I don't even know, and it brings up more anger inside of me. And I think that for me, I'm doing my best to be there for my children and my family, and being able to explain to them what it is I'm going through and why it's important. And my wife is amazing, because, as I said, she's understanding that there's a lot of things that she is learning now that she was naive to. And being able to have those conversations from my perspective, and then her being able to share from her perspective, that to me is really has been helpful for me.
Similar to Hugh, it's good to be able to have people who have different perspectives and are also open. It definitely helps with your mental health journey. It's been really difficult. And I think if I could answer how I'm feeling, I think for me, the issue that I struggle with the most is worry, and just worrying about what the future is going to look like. Last week there was an incident, and you can find it online, about 6 teenage boys in Dallas, Texas, who were refused service by a Sonic restaurant purely based on the fact that they were Black, and the establishment said that if they didn't leave, they would call the cops on them. These are 6 boys that wanted to get a hamburger at a restaurant. Good kids, really, really good kids. One of them happened to be my nephew. So just when I'm worrying about the future, I'm seeing how it's directly affecting my family. It's hard to say that I'm okay and that it'll be okay. Luckily for my nephew, his mother, my sister, is a lawyer, and a couple of other kids there, their parents also are lawyers, and they were able to put this restaurant to task. Not everybody gets that opportunity. Not everybody gets that privilege. Right now, there's a lot of emotion and passion and support. I'm hoping that this is something that continues and doesn't just end when everybody's back to work, back to the pre-COVID reality, as it were. I'm worried that if I have a son, I would have to have those conversations. So my anxiety right now is really just based on the future. And I don't feel like anybody ever needs to feel like that. But I'm also hopeful. So there's been lots of sad moments. Bree, I totally get it. The crying and the wondering. You even start to get this paranoia when you go outside. It's like, what do people think, right? You really never want to be in that space. But I'm hopeful that things will change. I really want to be positive through this experience because we are here today having these open conversations because of people that went ahead of us to open the space. And now that here we are having this conversation, I am hopeful that we are opening up a space for a future generation that would take this to the next level. Mentally, thank God for supports. Thank God we live in a country that has healthcare that's accessible. And so I definitely have things that I am thankful for in terms of the supports that I'm able to receive. And also having a supportive husband who's an accomplice definitely makes things easier for me. So, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate the time that all three of you have taken to come on and talk openly about this. I hope that there's been some education. I know I've learned a lot just doing this. I'm no expert. I'm also trying to learn as we go here, as Hugh said earlier. So I would like to thank you for taking the time for coming on. Do you have any social medias that you would like to promote, or if people want to contact you, how can they contact you?
My email is kinyabaker@gmail.com. That's kenyabaker@gmail.com. I don't do public social media.
That's fair. Okay.
My Twitter handle is at HDM Barmstraker. That's HDMBARMSTRAKER. I try to keep my Facebook and Instagrams more personal. So if anybody wants to reach out to me by Twitter, absolutely. I would be more than happy to continue the conversation. Of course, with the caveat that if there's any negativity, I will block them. But if somebody wants to have a true conversation, by all means, I'm open to that.
Yeah. My email is BREE.OAK22@gmail.com. And my social media is pretty personal and it's lighthearted. But if anyone would like to reach out to me, you can reach me via my email, and I'll be sure to shoot you an email back.
Great. Well, thank you again, and you can follow me at KEVOLE. And we thank everyone. We will talk to you all soon. Bye for now.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you.